Hello and welcome. We are talking today about gaming with kids. This talk is part of the IGDN summer series of panels, talks, discussions about games that might be interesting to you if you're interested in role-playing games and board games. We've assembled a wonderful panel of people who design and run games, and everyone here has some experience and interest in playing with younger people. So we're going to share some of our insights and thoughts and experiences with you.
Amazing. So I guess we'll start with introductions. We agreed to go in alphabetical order, so I'll go first. Hi there, my name is Daniel Kwan. I am a game designer, cultural consultant, and podcaster based in Toronto, Canada. I am the showrunner of the Emmy Award-winning Asians Represent podcast, independent designer. I've also worked for large companies like Wizards of the Coast, Critical Role, Paizo, and I have about 14 years of experience working in an educational setting with children and tabletop RPGs, where those two sort of like intersected. So I guess that's why I'm here. Pass it back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Daniel. My name's Emily Care-Boss. I've designed games for a couple of decades or so. I love role-playing games and LARP, and I've done a little bit of board game design that I'll talk about today. I've been lucky enough to have lots of friends with kids. I don't have any kids myself, but playing games with them, board games and especially role-playing games, has been a real source of joy for me. I really honestly look back to my childhood for some of the sources of design and play for me, and playing pretend and taking on a role in this, walking into a world is what children really do commonly, and getting to share that with them is a real pleasure. So I'm looking forward to talking about that today.
That brings us to me. Hi, my name is Robert Turk from Wicked Clever Games. In my current career, I am a game designer and publisher. I have also been a theater professional, a traditional author, a street entertainer for fairy festivals and Renaissance festivals, and have been designing and publishing, designing games my whole life, publishing games for about 10 years now. I do have two kids who have helped me design games, and they're now 13 and 17. So that's most of my games are for grown-ups, but I do have games that I wrote with them for them and have that experience. So there we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Kwan, sometimes on the internet known as the one true Ryan Kwan. I am a classroom teacher in elementary school and game designer. And I'm kind of always looking for the intersection between those two things. So how do I make the classroom a playful and gameful space? And likewise, how do I take what I know from the classroom and bring it to the table to make my games engaging and exciting for everyone there, regardless of age or experience? Because being a teacher and being a GM or facilitator is basically the same thing.
And I'm Steph from TTRPG Kids. So I run a web resource that has, it's over 400 articles now about playing tabletop role-playing games with kids, reviews, tips and tricks, and so on. My background, I am relatively new to tabletop RPGs. And also, my kid is 6 years old, so we've been playing games with him. It's been 4 years now. We started introducing kind of storytelling games to him. So I'm an engineer turned game designer and game blogger. So happy to bring the experience here.
I love the variety of ways that we've all engaged with kids. It's wonderful. We're bringing lots of different types, and also sounds like lots of different games. One of the things we talked about before we started recording was just sharing each of us games that we've found that have worked well, or that we've played with kids. So we want to do sort of a lightning round and just say a few games that we've played to give people a jumping off place to start with.
Why don't we go in reverse order? We can just like alternate.
Boom. There you go.
Steph, do you want to go first?
Sure. One of my favorite ones to play with my kid is called Starsworn. It's like a rules light, very story based tabletop RPG where story elements about your character determine what moves you can make in your stats. So it's not so much like number based. It's a lot more like kind of story focused. So we've really liked that one a lot.
That would be you, Ryan, now.
I mean, I have played so many games, especially in the classroom, because it's a lot more fun for me and fun for the students. If I'm allowed to do self promo,
You should.
Go for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
my game, Told by Starlight, is a myth making game which involves drawing out a star map by putting dots on a paper and drawing connections and creating your own mythology to go with these constellations. And I've found that it works really well in classrooms because there is this, like, the drawing element gives another way for younger kids especially to engage with the game. And then there's just the natural storytelling that comes. So I usually couch it with, like, we'll read real world mythology and then play this game. And then as extensions, measuring the angles in our constellations, because that is how astronomy actually works, and talking about so astronomy as well as the storytelling and history. So it's just a lot of interesting connections that can be made.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look into that now. That sounds really cool, especially with the mythology aspect. So I'm gonna do some self promo here too. Thank you for jumping that off there, Ryan. The game that I wrote, WyrdScouts, tabletop role playing game for cross generational play. I made it because I have a lot of examples of games that I can't play well with my kids, right? That they were on different levels than I was. The games that I like, they don't necessarily like. I'm a big fan. If a game takes 6 hours, like a board game, I feel like I've gotten my money's worth out of that. If a game takes 6 hours for my kids, they left 5 hours ago. So we created that one together, WyrdScouts, about magical kids in the Enchanted Forest going out to solve problems. Because they were wanting to get into D&D, but at their ages, late elementary school, D&D was just like one step beyond where they were. My eldest came home all excited about getting badges from Girl Scouts for the first time, and we were like, "Oh, you can gamify that," and so we started making this one, and it is designed so that parents or grandparents are playing with elementary school, middle-aged school kids, or kids are playing together by themselves. They don't need grown-ups. And if you have really little kids that want to play, there are roles for them as well, as magical animal familiars. So they can contribute to the story. They can roll some dice, and when they get bored and want to go watch Bluey, they totally can. It's not gonna derail the game. So other games that I have found that worked really well for my kids' role-playing games through the ages were Hero Kids was a great introduction. We all grew out of that one very, very quickly. No Thank You Evil was a great, fun role-playing game for kids. And when I'm talking to people, it's kind of like start with Hero Kids, then No Thank You Evil, then you move into WyrdScouts, and then you're ready for whatever your kids see on the shelf that has a cool cover and wants to get into. So I think I'm supposed to toss it over to Emily.
I love that sort of training wheels approach of like easing somebody into it. All of us have to sort of learn what role playing is and how it works for us. So it's nice to think that there's some on-ramps for younger people. We're sort of in a golden age of that right now. There was a period at starting a few years ago where every time I chatted with friends who had teenish or slightly younger people, kids, their kids were in a role-playing game club at school, and I'm envious and happy for this generation. A game I wanted to bring up, actually I've got two I wanted to bring up. One, I wrote with my husband, Epidai Ravachol, who wrote a horror game called Dread that uses Jenga. I think it's a fun game.
Shout out to Dread.
Yay!
A classic, wonderful indie game.
I'll tell him you all said that. We got this idea. I don't know even know how, but we to adapt it for younger people. And so instead of it being like a horror movie where everyone's going to die when the tower falls over, you're kids that are daring each other to stay overnight in a haunted house. And if the tower falls over, that means your kid is scared and runs out. And there's this thing about, if your character leaves, what do you do? So we sort of added something to this game that allows the kids to keep engaging, which is if your kid runs away, then you get to play one of the monsters that is haunting the house. And there's like a werewolf and, Gillman and all these kinds of things. So that has been really fun. And one of the elements, actually, Robert, you touched on this, that we found really worked well was incidental and not like a emergent design. We made a little coloring book out of the cute little illustrations, the black and white illustrations. And that was such a great tool, I found, in terms of just having something that, people can play with and focus on when it's not their turn. And so kids and adults usually enjoy that part of it too. And another game, it's a really old, back in the archives game, but that very well with kids is one called the Rocky and Bullwinkle, or Bullwinkle and Rocky Party Game, which is ESR game, believe it. Yep. Classic, the people who published D&D back in the day from 1988. And it is like one of the most like indie, non-traditional games you'll ever see. It's a role-playing game, and it jumps off this, the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon. But it has puppets. It has a spinner instead of dice, and like everybody's taking turns, and you're making an episode of the cartoon, and it's meant to be a comedy. So it has this looseness to it and lightness that is really fun. So that one, it's not on the shelves, but maybe you can find it in a game archive, or it's there's used copies for sale. So that's one that if you see it kicking around, it's a pretty fun one. And I'll hand it over to Daniel.
It's so funny that you brought up a TSR era game, because one of the ones I was going to bring up is also from the TSR era. So I have a whole bunch of games. I'm going to rapid fire my way through them, not in order of publication, although I think it might end up being like that. So the first one's from 1987. Is published in issue 125 of Dragon magazine, and it's called Clay-O-Rama. Yes. Clay-O-Rama is a classic game. It's very much an introduction to not only like character building in a role-playing perspective, but also skirmish games. So Clay-O-Rama was designed by David Cook, and it's a game about making clay monsters out of like Play-Doh. And you have a set amount of material, and you can make your monster, and you have to think about their attributes and their stats, and then you fight and destroy them. It's very tactile. Play it at cons all the time, mostly with adults. Yes. But it really brings out your inner child, and this game works incredibly well in the classroom. So there's that one. Second one is often another really great RPG that I like for first-time like players, especially like teen groups who are maybe just getting into RPGs and might have a first-time facilitator. Is a game by John Harper called Lady Blackbird. Lady Blackbird is incredible. It's a complete package, all in one. It's a digital game, and it has all the characters pre-made and a narrative from which you can kind of explore this sort of like daring, sort of steampunk-esque swashbuckling sort of story. It's very, very fun. I love Lady Blackbird. Ryan?
It's free, isn't it?
It's free. Yeah, it is free. And Clay-O-Rama is also free because Wizards of the Coast bought up all of TSR. They actually republished and reformatted Clay-O-Rama for free. So if you search for Clay-O-Rama, you can find a free PDF from Wizards of the Coast with expanded rules and narrative rules as well for campaigns. Next one is a game called Microscope. It's a fractal RPG by Ben Robbins. It's about creating epic histories. Really love that one. It's fantastic in the classroom. For mixed groups, I have to go local, and I have to talk about a game called Emberwind. Emberwind is an RPG by Derek Chung of Nomnivore Games. And what I think is really cool about Emberwind is that it actually has a modular rule set that allows you to play with differing levels of complexity at the same table without sort of compromising the experience for any other player. So I think from a like sort of a mixed age perspective or a mixed experience perspective when it comes to games, Emberwind is incredible. And then I'll do some self promo, I guess.
Go for it.
When I was a teacher at the Royal Ontario Museum, I wrote a game called Ross Rifles. Ross Rifles is a game about the Canadian experience with the First World War. It was recently featured in the Canadian War Museum's exhibition on war games, about the sort of the intersection of war, play, and like games. So yeah, those are my sort of 5 recommendations: Clay-O-Rama, Lady Blackbird, Microscope, Emberwind, and Ross Rifles.
We'll have to make sure that there are links to all of our various endeavors, and then to these games.
And whoever's editing
connected.
this.
Yeah, no to them.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the next topic that we wanted to cover was sort of thinking about what we find our best practices or good tips for gaming with kids are, lessons we've learned, or things that we kind of bring to the table when we're thinking about having younger people involved in whatever we are doing. Shall we go back into our order, or do we want to do more of a popcorn kind of a answering?
Oh, we can mix it up. Every single question
We can,
be a different order of initiative.
We don't want people to get bored, right?
No, we'll popcorn it. I mean, I'm sure everybody has things to say, and we can add to each other's things here. So
Yeah. That's true. Let's transition to that.
Ryan, you're
Excellent.
a classroom teacher right now. What are you
I
doing?
am. So I've run. It wasn't an official gaming club, but it was if you came to my classroom at recess, there would usually be a game. And the biggest thing that I've found as being an important piece is just setting expectations, like letting everybody know, like, what are we doing here? What's the goal? What's the purpose? And making it kind of like opt in or opt out. So I've straight up said to classrooms, like, we're doing this, one, to play a game because that's fun, but also because we're practicing communication. We're practicing listening to each other and sharing ideas. So in order to do that, we have to do things like, be quiet when someone else is talking and like ask questions, build off of people, it's the yes and piece. But I just think like the setting expectations goes a really long way to just getting everybody on board. And I find that to be true regardless of the age of the players.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that like getting that buy-in from everyone at the table is so important, because if you're misaligned on your expectations, that's where you can have sort of I guess behavioral issues can arise at the table. You can have people who come and maybe expect like, oh, I want to do some fighting, but if the game has no fighting whatsoever, that can lead to sort of like tension, like within the game space itself. I personally love like accessible like gaming aids. I think it's so important to like not only have like buy-in, but also have ways in which people can communicate. I think, discussing safety tools and rules and expectations, incredibly important, but also giving people an opportunity to engage with the narrative as they see fit. Sometimes you're just going to have folks who want to be there to fight things. You're going to have folks who want to be there to, role play, to interact with NPCs. And having an understanding that, or setting an expectation that you may not look engaged, but you can be present in that moment, right? I think it's also important to set an expectation that folks at the table can participate as they want to participate too. And having flexibility is really key. One product that I found was really, really helpful, especially as folks got more and more creative at the table, was having a way in which you could communicate what things look like. What did the scene look like? There's it's a game, but it also has peripherals that I think are great, called the Index Card RPG.
Yes.
And the Index Card RPG has like a whole bunch of like printouts that you could do of scenes. It could be like a blacksmith. It could be like a fountain, like a gate. And when I would run games, when I would describe a scene, I used to lay out the index cards on the table, and folks could basically use it to organize like the actual setting, the immediate setting in front of them. We would put our miniatures on the specific building, so we would all know where each other was, because sometimes it's hard to track where you are. So I think giving people a lot of support when it comes to engaging with the narrative is just as important as like setting expectations on what is going to happen. Because we could say, we're not going to fight, we're or we are going to fight, or it's going to have a mix of both. But if I'm coming to the table and I have no idea how I'm actually going to keep track of things, or I might have like challenge keeping track of things, I'm going to become less and less engaged. So having that support for gameplay is so important.
Yeah. You did mention briefly there safety tools, which I know most people in the indie gaming community understand what that is and know what that is, but maybe not everybody watching this understands and knows what that is. And this is something that I have, as my kids have gotten older, introduced. Like our family games now have the very basic safety tool of the X card, which is just a way to point out and say, hey, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to experience this. And I think introducing safety tools, especially with role-playing games with kids at an early age, will help them as they grow up, not only communicate what is they're okay with, what stories they're comfortable with and not comfortable with, but it's going to make them better adult players at the table as well. So definitely getting into those safety tools and introducing some of those as soon as you feel your kids are ready for them. There's another one that I recently learned about, and y'all might say, Robert, you're so dumb. Everybody knows about this one. All right. But in addition to the X card is one of our fellow IGDN designers uses what they call the O card. And it's essentially just holding up an O with your hands. Like, because X card is no, don't go there. And the O is keep that going. I love that. And so I started using that at convention games. I haven't run convention game with kids in a while, but to give some positive feedback back in that loop too. So I think it's important not only to say, we're not going to do this, but here's the positive stuff, right? That's all.
The nice thing about the O card is that it also shows like consent and excitement without interrupting. But if I can share a quick anecdote about the X card, I was playing Single Unique Power, which is like a really quick and easy game to play by Tyler Crumrine of Possible World Games. And it's about just making up single unique powers and the rivalries like you'd see in like X-Men or One Piece or any of that kind of media. And I was playing with this little guy who was 7. And he, we wrote down these words that are supposed to spark ideas for powers, and he wrote down "but," spelled B-U-T. And when I asked for clarification, he's like, "No." He pointed to his behind, and we had a laugh about it. And then immediately after, he tapped the X card because he's like, "Okay, he was saying, I've made my joke. We had a laugh, but I don't actually want it in the game." And it was just like a great example of super clear communication, and we were able to have the laugh, have the joke, and then like go on to the next thing.
That's very interesting. I've never seen the X card used in that case. I think it's also for the X card, just one thing to be really clear about. The X card isn't used if you don't like your role.
Correct. It's not to avoid mechanics.
Yeah, it's not to avoid mechanics. It's to say, hey, this content isn't
right.
I don't want this content. Let's rewind. Let's retcon that out of the narrative. I think the O card is also not only to show that like, oh, I'm loving this, but to also show that I'm okay.
Yes.
Because you could be role playing a really, really heavy scene, and the O card can be used to share that like, I'm okay in this moment. This is like I want this. I am playing my character. So the O card is like you said, Ryan, it's there to show consent, but also to like show that like, hey, I'm like literally okay in the moment, because I think folks might want to throw up the X if they think something is wrong, and that's why the O is kind of there to help moderate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steph, did you have a comment?
Yeah. So with regards to the X card, so with my kid, we used something kind of similar. Because he was little when we started first playing, we had just a red block because it was a little more tactile that we would use. And he did start using it just to stop the game to be silly. And the best way to handle something like that, like you go in with a flexible mindset is, I think, the key thing. He raised the red block, kind of giggling, and I was like, stopped. Okay, what is it that you want to talk about? oh, I just want to be funny kind of thing. It's like, okay, 2 seconds later, does it again. So we stop the game, we pause, we talk about it. Does it again, does it again, does it again. The game's not going anywhere. So we used it as a teaching moment to say, okay, is this very fun? And he was like, no. I'm like, because we can't do anything, right? And since then, he hasn't like abused the block or like the X card ever again. So if you do have players that are using like safety tools and things like that for poor rolls, sometimes it can be a teaching moment to let that play out and see what happens and show that like this does not make the game fun when you are kind of breaking the spirit of the tool. And just kind of, I think, going in and expecting that kids are going to try and like mess with things and tweak things and test their control.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be testing boundaries, testing control a lot more than adult players. And I mean, I've seen this with my kid. And then also, like, I've used tabletop RPG elements in the college course that I taught. So this was with 18-year-olds. They did it too. So, but it didn't happen so much with like my friend groups because it was a different kind of situation. So that boundary testing, I think, is something that comes up a lot more in tabletop RPGs with young players. And sometimes letting them push that and experimenting with that can be like a really good teaching moment. So going in expecting that chaos is kind of one of my tips.
I'm curious about strategies related to that boundary testing, because I think it's important to allow people to kind of like test that, but also like, you know, Ryan, in your classroom setting, if you have, you know, kids coming in for recess to play games and you have one kid who wants to sort of test those boundaries and push those boundaries, how do you accommodate that but also take into account everyone else at the table?
I mean, it's a lot of it kind of goes back to what Steph said, and with their anecdote of just like, is this actually fun for everybody? Like, we're trying to maximize fun for the table. We want everybody here to have fun. So even if you find this really entertaining, is everybody else enjoying it?
It's kind of
And it's
calling
just,
it out in the
yeah.
moment at the table with the much larger group.
And it's just it's clear communication. I had a student basically, I mean, testing the boundaries. We were playing the Wild Sea, which is a swashbuckling weird fantasy game on a global forest of, so like a sea of trees. And the first thing one of my students did is like, I want to shoot that guy. I'm like, all right, we'll let this happen. But he was just trying to see like, could he do that? Because he ended up being the kid who grokked the, not just the mechanics, but the vibe more than anyone else, and later on made a character with no combat skills because he's like, I want to try these other ways of solving problems, which if I had just shut it down and said, no, you can't do this, I would have been shutting down his creativity. And it's just being flexible, giving space, but then just communicating. It's like, because I could say like, oh, I don't know if killing this person would be really fun. So how about we try like something like this? And he was totally on board, and he laughs about that moment. But then just like he was one getting other kids really into the role play as well in the end.
Yeah. I think along those lines too, what you brought up there about sort of testing the boundaries, and I found this definitely playing with middle school and younger high school kids that have only seen Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube or something like that. When they jump into a game, their first solution is, oh, let's shoot that thing. Let's kill that thing. Can we beat it? I find that when you're dealing with kids that have a little more maturity and can think through consequences, to pause the game in that moment and say, okay, you can absolutely do this if this is what you want your characters to do. But if we want to play a realistic story here, this might be what happens next if you go down this path. Is that still something you want to do? So that nobody feels like, because you could just say, okay, fine, you kill these guys, and then a bigger guy comes along to beat you up for doing that, and give them an immediate, like, here's your consequence, right? But in the game, it should be expected that maybe their players would know like there's some consequences to these actions. And so I have found that taking that moment to pause and not belittling anybody and giving them the option to, like, if this is what y'all really want to do, if this is your solution to it, fine, let's do it. Let's see what happens. But know that there's could be these consequences from it. Allows them to think a little more strategically and actually helps them get into the story of the game a little bit more. Suddenly they're not a video game anymore. Suddenly they're not there to just shoot people. They're there to solve problems. They're there to help people. And it's like, oh, all right, there's other things I can do. So I think that's great what you were saying. And then to take that moment and build it in there.
I like how specific you were, though. Oh, sorry, Emily, go ahead.
I just want to say that it's great. We sort of segued naturally into talking about challenges and roadblocks, which is one of our other talking points. And we're like in the groove with each other here today. I had been thinking before when I was thinking about talking here, it was about some of the experiences I had working with the same kids over many years, which was a real privilege. And seeing those changes come and like the different things they focused on or that they were interested in, and also how they would come into and go out of phase of working really well with one another's imaginations and then being totally at cross purposes. And each of them, or not really, but sometimes there would be moments where either one of them had just crossed a boundary where they just were like really looking at the gameplay in a different way. Or there'd be a friend who would join us who would really be like, oh, and then there's $1 million. So, so it was really interesting to like figure out how we communicated and created the consensual space for imagination, and then figured out, how to have the youngest person be involved, like, oh, okay, they're going to play somebody's pet. Perfect. You are the dog. You want to be the dog. You're literally pretending to be a dog right now. We're on somebody's, in somebody's bedroom and like we're jumping around on the bed and you're like barking. So like there was just a lot of wonderful ways that we found to like bridge those gaps, but they can be really challenging. It was really, I think that one of the main principles that we found to work for all of us was just to like take a step back, talk about what we wanted to get out of the play together, make sure we reconnected about whatever our original agreement was. Is this an adventure game or, were we trying to like find a mystery, whatever it was, to just come back to that place and then also take a break, having food, having water. I definitely found either both in the like very loose freeform kind of play that we did together, and then at the table, having different ways for people to engage was so useful. Like we talked about earlier with like, whether it's clay or drawing, or it's actually really, I think, probably a great eye-opening thing for adults to play with younger people because they aren't just trained into like working with your brain and your eyes. There's this whole world here. We're physical people, and there's a lot more of those elements that can come in. I'm afraid I may have frozen. If so, I apologize for my signal. But
no, we
it is
can
being
hear you.
recorded as a separate file backup.
It helps. Now that people are watching it, are going to have to really focus.
Yeah.
Steph, you got anything to add in there? Or other roadblocks or challenges too. That's totally.
So one of the biggest roadblocks that I have seen, so like I review games for TTRPG kids and we'll post like an article about it, but we play them. And so we've run through like over 100 tabletop RPGs at this point. And one of the biggest roadblocks that I think people don't realize happen when they design a game for kids is accidental complexity. So there's like a game is recommended for a certain age group, and then you kind of like get into it, and it's like it starts out as this one simple like set of rules, and then there's trackers added on, and this added on, and this added on, and this added on, and it gets to be too much for a kid. Like it's great for an adult, but it's like a little overwhelming. So having it where you can kind of step into it and ramp up. Like I really like the games that have a like a level 0 that's like really easy to pick up, and then it kind of like steps into like a first level tier, second level tier, etc., and like increase the complexity over time are great. So that's maybe like one way to get past that. But otherwise, like it can also sometimes be okay to just use a d6 and make a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's when we're not checking out games to review. That's a lot of times what we use, and the stories are just as great. So um, that's one of the things where if the complexity or the game mechanics are becoming a roadblock, it's okay to parse it down. It's okay to take things out and make sure that you're focusing on the fun, the vibe that you're getting or that you want to convey with the game. We've used other games as like a base before and been like, the story from this is amazing, but the mechanics are a little too much. So we're going to step it back like 3 dice levels and like still play the game, but make the adjustments that we need. So that is one of the big roadblocks that we've seen. It's not worth getting your kids frustrated and stressed out because the math is like 3 grade levels above where they're at. So
I think there's this there to me there's a piece of like game feel. Like people want to feel like they have played a certain game. So when I had a few students when I was teaching in Taiwan, they one kid came to me and said she wanted to play the wizard game because she just kind of heard about D&D. And then I'm thinking, well, like I'm playing with 3 kids who like they are learning English and they are learning English in a non-English setting. And so it's like, okay, you have 3 attributes, like how smart you are, like how athletic you are, and how charming you are. And one of them gives you get to add 1 to a roll, you get to add 3, or you get to add 5, and everything we just roll a d20. And the idea of rolling a d20, these simple attributes, was enough to give the feeling of playing D&D. And I said to them, we're playing with simplified rules here to just keep things moving along quickly. If you like this, you can learn more, but we're going to play the super smooth version. And that girl actually emailed me about a year ago. This was like 5 years after I had left Taiwan and stopped teaching her. And it's like, and that was the thing she remembered. She's like, I was the loud girl who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons.
That's awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I've had so many run-ins with my former students. It's so cool when you see them like still gaming as well. One thing that I really like that you said, Steph, was that like accidental complexity. One of the things that I've been doing lately is kind of reading tabletop RPGs that like from like Asia. And one that I've been reading through recently is a Japanese game called Sword World. Sword World's kind of like Japan's D&D. It's their most popular fantasy tabletop role-playing game. And what's interesting is that the way it's written in a way where it almost feels to like a Westerner who has grown up playing tabletop RPGs, that everything is over-explained. Everything feels over-explained. Like if you're doing a check, it's like they have a name for the result of the check. They have a name for the collection of bonuses that you would add to the check. And it's very interesting seeing that sort of like intentional complexity for like an audience that might not actually be aware of it. I think to build on what you said about sort of accidental complexity in the design space, I think one thing that designers don't think about is how complicated the game might actually be for the facilitator. It might be very straightforward for the participants, but for the person actually facilitating the game, it may actually be very difficult. And there are often a lot of rules like games that I may not actually want to put in the hands of a first-time group. I say group to include the facilitator because I'm like, sometimes you might actually need that structure. So that's where I wanted to add to this idea, this challenge of complexity, and like, are you going to be able to facilitate the experience for everyone too? Because all of us, we've been playing for, we at this point, relative to a lot of like the people who may be watching it, we're very experienced in this space. And for those who might want to be like, I want to pick up the, like, I think we must have mentioned 10 to 15 games at the start of this recording. I want to play any one of these. It may actually be difficult to play an RPG for the first time and not know how to structure the session, how to not only, manage expectations and manage behaviors and everything like, but also manage how the rules of the game work. I think it's so important to think, if you're like a teacher and you're inspired and you want to be like Ryan, and you should want to be like Ryan because Ryan is awesome. Think about how you are going to be able to run the game. We have all these amazing tips, and there's a lot of things to consider, but also think about what's going to be easy for you to facilitate as well. Because if you don't have that established sort of baseline, it will be so challenging for you to also moderate all of the social aspects of the game experience too. That's why I think, initiative is so important. And there are a lot of games that have freeform combat. But for somebody who's like, I don't know what's happened, I've never been in a fight. How am I supposed to, I like turn taking, and having an established order is a structure that can help, set expectations. So yeah, there's that unexpected complexity, and there's a practice of considering what complexity is required for you as well.
Yeah. And from a design standpoint, since we do have designers that are going to be watching this, remember that your GMs are not inside your head, right? They don't know all the things that you have thought about in designing these games. That's the one thing whenever I get done with a playtest that I have to remember. Now, my next step is to make sure that everybody else can run the game I just ran with my playtesters. There was one thing, I know we're running short on time, I wanted to hit on. I think it's kind of been mentioned, but not really established. I think it's very important to meet your gamers, in this case, kids, on their level. Meet them where they're at. Okay. So if they don't have calculus in their back pocket, don't be playing a game that requires all of this difficult math, right? Because they're not going to have fun. And at the end of the day, playing a game together it can be about education. It can be about community building. It can be about, but it ultimately is about having fun and having a good time. So meeting your kids where they're at. Short story. My kids have a 3-year age gap between them. And so the games that we played when they were younger had to kind of bridge that age gap. My son, who is the younger one, loved Candyland. All right. We played so many games of Candyland. My older child, only 3 years older, was bored to tears of Candyland. All right. But we still tried to play it for the younger one. And then one day I was like, okay, what would make this more fun for you? We know Candyland's working for the younger one, right? Exactly like it is. Don't need to change it. What would make this more fun for you? And my older kid said, well, if it was a little more like zombie dice. So we got the zombie dice out. And for me and the older kid playing, we rolled the dice and we had a zombie minion chase us trying to steal our candy. The younger kid was immune. They didn't get to steal the younger kid's candy. But we were playing 2 different games at the same time, all playing the same game together. So I think you could do that. That's allowed. One, right? You can have kids of one age playing a game one way and kids of another age playing the game at a deeper level or a more strategic level, as long as everybody's having fun. So I think it's very important to meet the kids where they're at. And to remember, the games that I like, the games that I play with my friends, my kids don't like them. They're not going to play those games. And every time I've tried to force them to play those games with me, like, no, you're really going to love this. It's going to be great. It has ended in disaster. So I find the games your kids want to play and then make them work so that you as a grown-up can have fun too.
I feel like that's just a tip for anybody who wants to play tabletop RPGs, because I'm sure that all of us have games we would love to play, but our group has zero interest in.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Or the other way around.
Yes.
Or the group wants to play and I
don't want to run that. Yeah. 100%.
I love the idea of Lancer, but
Yeah, I too love the idea of Lancer, and I think their online tool CompCon is very, very cool.
Oh yeah,
But I think I would rather play BattleTech instead. I will shout out a game again, and it was Emberwind, because Emberwind does exactly what you said, Robert.
Yeah, it does.
And if for folks who are watching or listening, if you actually go to the Emberwind website, there's actually like a thing you can go through, and it asks you like, how, like, do you want complex rules? How complex do you want the rules to be? Is there a facilitator? Because there's actually a rule set that's GM-less, or do you want to have a facilitator? And it's really, really well designed.
They're also really nice guys. I have been next to them
Yeah,
at many
Nomnivore
conventions. They're
they're
really
doing
nice.
kids games now too. They're doing kids games now too. So had to have to like bring that up again, because it's the only game that I know of that's very intentional about that sort of soft practice you're mentioning, right? It's like we can all homebrew this stuff, but there are, I think, very few games who intentionally like enable, mixed sort of like rule sets and mixed complexity at the same table, which I think is very, very cool.
Sounds like that's a pull order for our designers out there, right? There's a niche that people could be fulfilling with design. We should probably wrap up. I want to add just one more game pitch. What Daniel was saying about the initiative made me think of Mobile Frame Zero, which
that game's incredible.
Which basically you start by building your mechs. It's a robo-mech fighting miniatures game, and you make them out of Lego. So that's like totally fun right there. Yeah. And it's a very well-designed system, and it's not much on the role-playing side, but it's another one to think about if you're playing.
There's a role-playing game for Mobile Frame Zero. It's called Firebrands.
Oh, yes, indeed. There is indeed. So it's all out there.
Yep. I think before we wrap this up, though, it is pretty traditional on all of the videos to let everybody know. One, we've had awesome guests today. Thank you all for being part of this. Give a quick shout out. We'll just go around the table where people can find more of your work or more of your ideas, right? So I guess we go in reverse alphabetical order. So Steph, you can go first.
So you can find all of my stuff through the TTRPGkids.com website. I've got a book called Making a Tabletop RPG for Your Particular Kid out. And I believe that at the time this airs, my backer kit campaign for A Construct's Nature, which is a narrated solo journaling game. So like can people who are like kids who are still learning to read can still do a journaling game. So that should still be going on. Otherwise, on socials, if you look up TTRPG Kids, I should come up on, there's like 7 social media platforms that I'm on. So that's just that little phrase should kind of get you there. So yeah, thank you for having me on.
Just to shout you out a little bit more, Steph, there was an article you wrote, and I need to look up the name of it, but reading it was the thing that made me think, maybe I do want to do a PhD. So,
oh wow,
okay, cool, thank you.
And I'm like, and I was pretty confident I did not want to go back to school, but I'm like, oh, but the intersection between like the fiction of a character and the experience in the classroom was just fascinating. And reading about your engineering class was just like, I want data on this. I want to know more about this. Yeah. So read the blog. It's fantastic. Highly recommend.
I got to interject there. Did you go back and get your PhD?
No, that's a project for down the road.
Okay. All right.
But that is absolutely what I would research.
Yeah. Love it.
Like, but for my stuff, you can find it on my itch page, which is just archon.itch.io. So RKHAN. You can also find me online as the one true Ryan Khan, because Ryan Khan is a remarkably common name, and I'm the real one.
There you go.
And coming up very soon is my game Bug Dish, which is about little bug chefs who travel the world in their food truck to compete in cooking competitions. I was literally working on the manuscript before this started, but that is around the corner, so keep an eye out for that. There is a quick start version of it available on my itch page as well.
Robert, I think it's your turn.
That goes to me. Sorry. I went on a tangent there in my brain. Quick starts. I want to throw this in there. Quick starts are great if you want to get a feel for a game or see if your table likes it. And they're usually simpler rules. So you can actually just run a game for your kids off of a quick start. And see. And there's lots of quick starts out there for lots of games. More for role-playing games, I think, than board games. But lots of quick starts out there for role-playing games to kind of try it out and see if you like it and see if your kids like it. So where can you find my stuff? As I get older and older, I try to eschew the socials more and more, which is a terrible business practice, but that's just where I'm at. So the best place to find me is at my website. It's wicked-clever.com. Or if you see me at a convention, Origins, AcadeCon, Lexington Comic-Con, you can wave and say hi or come talk. I won't bite your head off or anything. I'm nicer than I seem at a distance. So there you go. Over to Emily.
All right. You can find my games at my gaming company website, Black and Green Games. The website URL is blackgreengames.com. And I'm on various social media, most often using Emily Care as my handle, Discord and Tumblr mostly these days. And I'm Care Green Eyes at Tumblr. But I really look forward to looking up all these games, and I have a page where I recommend some games. I should add a family games recommendation section, so maybe I'll add all these there on my website. And
That's
to you,
awesome.
Daniel.
Yeah, you could find me at Daniel H. Kwan on pretty much every social media platform. I don't like being on social media, but I am out of, I guess, necessity. My podcast is called Asians Represent. And speaking of quick starts, if you're looking for like a nice sort of tight package with like simple to learn rules, you can get the Avatar Legends starter set. I was one of the designers on this. And we recently did a reprint of Ross Rifles. Unfortunately, the current game that I'm working on is not for children. It is a hyper-violent martial arts game, but we set very clear expectations of what the game is. But in terms of like educational or family-based games, like Avatar Legends, Ross Rifles, and my first game, which I always forget about, but I just remembered, is called Zany Zoo. It's literally a zoo brochure, and it's about being animals and trying to escape the zoo. But yeah, that's me, Daniel H. Kwan on all socials. That's Daniel H. Kwan. I am not the most famous Daniel Kwan. That person has an Oscar and wrote Everything Everywhere All at Once.
But you're still my favorite Daniel Kwan.
I am Ryan. I am the one true Ryan Kahn's favorite Daniel Kwan.
There you go.
So, and I think that means more.